In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to go about theming an Ionic 2 application. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and this isn't going to be a super in-depth video, but I'm just going to go through a few quick examples of the different ways you can theme your application and typically how I would go about doing it. So I've got an application here that I've created in another tutorial, and I'll link to that if you want to build it. But it is essentially just an app that displays some YouTubers, and it has some functions that we can run on the data that it's displaying. So we can run this filter function that filters out certain YouTubers. We can hit this button which modifies the data. If you want to know why it's doing that particularly, you can go take a look at the tutorial. You can learn quite a lot about filtering, mapping, and reducing data in that tutorial. So we're not going to worry about what's happening in this application. We're just going to apply a few styles to it and make it look a little bit nicer. There's already a little bit of styling here already. We've got the color attribute set on the header here. So if I was to open up that page, you see we've got the danger color here, but apart from that, we haven't really defined any custom styles or other SAS variables or anything like that. So I'm going to talk about doing those things in this tutorial. So one way that we can style our Ionic 2 applications is to use some inbuilt CSS utility attributes that Ionic supplies for us. So like that color equals danger attribute there, but we also have some other things as well. One is this item left attribute here. So we can apply that to the Ion avatar to display it on the left, but there's a bunch more that we can use as well. So to get us started, let's say that I want to not display lines on this list here. I just want them to be floating in space there. So what I can do, I could of course create a CSS style to get rid of that bottom border there, but I can also just add the no lines attribute straight onto the list. That's the content. Add it here. So if I add that to the list and I save it, it's going to get rid of those lines. So those utility attributes that Ionic does supply can come in really handy for things like that. Saves you a bit of work. There are quite a few of them, and it may be difficult to actually know what's available. So I'm going to put out a tutorial soon, hopefully, that lists some of the common ones and what they do, but it can be quite confusing to figure out what's available. You might not know what's available, so a lot of the time you may just end up creating your own custom CSS style for it, which we are going to cover how to do as well. But before we get to that, I'm going to cover another way to style your application, and that's using SAS variables. Now, if you don't know what SAS is, it stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. And it's a pre-compiler for CSS essentially. So we can create variables in CSS, and we can do more fancy things rather than just what CSS allows us to do by default. So we can create nested rules, we can create variables we can reuse throughout the application. A good example is like that danger color we're using, for example. Rather than manually defining whatever this red color is wherever we want to use it, we can just create this danger color that we can then reuse. And the benefit of that is if we ever want to change what the danger color is, then all we have to do is change it in one spot, and that's going to be reflected everywhere in the application. So I'll use that as an example. If I jump into the code here and go to the variables.scss file, so this is where we can define some of these SAS variables, and Ionic already has some set up by default here. And they've got a color map set up. So usually the variables will just be like this, sorry, with a $sign. But we've got a map set up here that defines a whole bunch of colors that we can use. And so you can see we've got danger set to this color here, and then we use that like this in our template file. So if I was to change this to, let's just go with black and save that. If we go back into the application, that's going to apply to that header now. So wherever we've used that danger variable, that's going to apply in our application. Red is cooler though, so I'm going to switch back to that for now. So as well as these color variables here, we can also define some other variables as well. We could define our own, and we can also hook into the ones that Ionic has already defined and is using. So we can add something here that's actually going to affect the application. So you could use background color, for example, is one. So I could write background color, and we'll make that black again just because it's obvious. So if I save that, go back to the application, you can now see that the background is black now. So I'm going to get rid of that. There's some other ones as well, and we're going to go have a look at a few of them. So if you go to the Ionic documentation and go to the theming section, there's a page called Overriding Ionic Variables, and this defines all of the variables that are available. And as you can see, there is lots and lots here. So we can change any of these that we want to. We can overwrite them, and then that's going to affect the way that things display in the application. And you'll notice that some of these variables actually relate to other variables. So the card iOS padding here is set to 9 pixels, but if we take a look at, let's find one here. So the checkbox iOS icon border color on uses this variable. So if that variable changes, that's going to affect this as well. So this is a good way, if you're changing variables in Ionic rather than manually overriding styles, there's a better chance that it's going to be reflected in other places in the application where it makes sense for that change to occur also. So just to show an example, let's modify one of these. And since we're using an item, let's use one of the item variables. So there should be a padding for the material design. Let me just jump back up here in case I missed it. Okay, so we have an item MD padding top. So the MD is material design, that's the Android styling, and that's set to 13 pixels. So if I want to change that, I can just grab this variable and put it in our variables.scss file. And instead of 13 pixels, I'm going to set that to 50. This is going to look silly, but we're going to see the effect that it has on the application. So as you can see now, we've got that padding at the top and it's pushed the content down. And we're on a Galaxy S5 here, so that is getting that material design styling. But if I were to switch that to an iPhone and refresh that, the styling doesn't apply here. So the variables can also be a good way to get platform-specific styles as well. And we'll do just one more example. We're going to style this avatar here. So let's jump back into the documentation. We'll search for an avatar attribute. Okay, here we go. We've got the item MD avatar size, and that's set to 40 pixels. So if I grab that, we're going to change it from 40 pixels to 70 pixels. So I'll save that, jump back into the app again, and we can see nothing's happened here because we're on the iPhone, and that was a material design specific variable. So now if I jump back into the Galaxy and refresh it, you can see we've got our padding back and the avatar is bigger now as well. So both of those styles look pretty bad, so I'm actually just going to get rid of those now. Save that and go back to our original application. So the next thing we're going to do is look at creating our own custom CSS rules. So to do that, each component has its own home.scss file, or rather it will be called whatever the component is called. But we have this SCSS file, which is a Sass file, and we can define some custom styles in there for that specific component. Because this includes the selector for that component, so if we look in here, so rather in the TypeScript file, you can see the selector is page home. So if we define some styles inside of page home, these styles are only going to affect that component. And it has actually just started raining outside, so I hope that you can't hear that too much. Okay, so we can also define some styles in the app folder here as well, in the app.scss file, and they're styles that are going to be applied app-wide rather than just to a specific component. Okay, so one really cool thing that Sass allows us to do is nest selectors and rules like this. So we have our page home selector here, and then inside of that I could define another selector, and so that's only going to target paragraphs that are inside page home now. But then I could even go one deeper than that. I could also say, let's say this is a div, and then inside of that I could say I want a paragraph tag. So now this rule is only going to apply to paragraphs that are inside of divs that are inside of the page home component. So we're going to use that style of defining CSS rules now to define some styles for our application. So what I want to try and do is make these individual items pop out a little bit more, have their own little container and their space to float around in. So to do that, let's take a look at our HTML here. So we have an Ion item for each of these YouTubers that we're rendering out here. So I want to hook into that and create some kind of padding around it, some kind of container. So what we can do is jump into our home.scss file and we can target Ion item. So that's going to target every Ion item that is inside of our home page. So if we have other items that were on another page, we wouldn't have to worry about this CSS affecting those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bit of padding to them, 20 pixels of padding, and let's just give it a 1 pixel border. So I'll save that and see what that looks like. And as you can see, nothing has really changed here. So this brings up another important concept in with CSS, and that's specificity, which apart from being really hard to say is really important. So what it means is that essentially the most specific CSS rule is going to apply. So if I open up one of these in the inspector now, and let's just we'll go to our Ion item, which we're attempting to style. And so we can see a list of all the styles that are being applied here. So we have one that's being applied to the item MD class. These are all being applied by Ionic. And we have a whole bunch of things in here. So the problem with us trying to define our own CSS rule is that if our selector is less specific than what Ionic is doing, then it's not going to apply it. So to get around that, you can add an important here. And if we save that, refresh it, we can see that the border is there, but it's best to avoid using that wherever possible. I think the better approach is to just create a more specific rule. And the way I usually get around this is to add the iOS and material design classes. So what this does is it only targets CSS rules for either iOS or material design. So what I'm saying here is that I want these rules to apply to both iOS and material design. But if I wanted to just create rules that would only apply to iOS, I could create a separate iOS selector down here and define my rules inside of there. So I don't specifically want to create different rules for iOS and Android here, but what this does is makes these rules more specific. So if I save these now and take a look, we can see that the padding is being applied, but the border still isn't being applied. So if we inspect this item in our debugger here, we'll take a look at why that's not happening. And so if I click on Ion item, I can see all the styles that are being applied to this, and I can see that it's getting a border width 0 property here. So if I get rid of that, we can see the lines come back. And that's because this style is coming from that no lines attribute that we added before. So that no lines attribute is overriding the borders that we're trying to add. So what we need to do in this case is either get rid of that no lines, or perhaps the easiest solution in this case is just to add important. Now it's fine to use that if you need to. It's just best to avoid it where possible, because you don't want to just have tons of important statements over your entire CSS file, and then it's going to break the order of things, the natural order of things. So Avoid it where possible, but if you need to, like in this case, if it makes sense, feel free to use it. Another cool thing we can do with our Sass variables is we can use them in here directly as well. And so what I'm going to do is make use of the colors we already have defined. So what I can do in here, let's say if I want to add a background color, I can do background color. Of course, I could just do a black again. So we'll check that that actually works first. And it does. But let's say I want to use one of our predefined colors. So what I can do is usually you would just access the color like this. But since we are defining it in a map here, what we have to do is use map get. So we can do map get and then supply the map that we're getting it from, which is colors, and then the name of the color we want. So we'll go for the primary color. So we'll save that. And now we can see we have this really ugly blue color being applied instead. So we can use any of those colors that are defined. So I'll change it to danger, take a look at what that looks like, and now it's all red. So the cool thing about this is that if I were to have a bunch of different things I was styling here and I wanted to give them all that red color, I can use this to define it. And that way, if I ever want to change that in the future, all I have to do is change this one value here, and then the whole application is going to update to reflect that, rather than me having to go through and individually changing everything. So all those changes are pretty ugly, so I'm going to delete those for now. I'll keep the padding actually, but let's try and get something that actually looks kind of decent. Okay, so I've got rid of those styles now. We're back to just the padding on a white background. And what we're going to do now is just generate a box shadow, a bit of a background to make it look like the items are popping off from the screen a little bit. And so to generate box shadows, I usually just use this box shadow generator on cssmatic.com. It allows you to play around with the shadow to try and get something you like, and then you can just copy and paste the CSS into your CSS. So let's try and create something that might look decent here. I'll set that to 0 and maybe a slight blur on it and a little bit less spread. Okay, so we'll copy that. We'll see how that looks. We'll just add it to that Ion item styling again. Save it and take a look. Okay, so you can see there's a very, very faint box shadow there that we can see. It looks pretty decent actually, I think. But let's just see what it would look like if we were to put a bit of a margin on this as well. And we'll save that first and take a look. Okay, so now the boxes are a bit more obvious now. They pop out from the screen because they sort of have their own space now. We have this problem where it's kind of pushing off to off the side of the screen here. Now, if you don't want that to happen, what we can do, so we're just going to set a width of, let's say, 90%, we'll say 96% on these, and then we'll add a margin to the left and right of 2%. So we'll change this to, we'll leave that at 10 pixels, and then 2% for the left and the right. So the first value is the top and bottom margin, the second is the left and right. So I'll save that, and let's see if it looks any good. Okay, so now we have the boxes centered quite well now. The shadow looks a bit ugly though, I think, so maybe if we just tone it down a little bit, we'll change the opacity value here, the alpha value, which is at 75% now, 0.75. If we change that to, let's try 30%, see what that looks like. Yeah, it's a little bit more subtle now. Maybe we can even drop it down just slightly more as well. Okay, that's cool. I like that. So now it's a little bit more subtle, looks a little bit better now, and it looks a little bit more interesting than when it was just on a flat white background. And I want to go through just one more quick example here, because I've only got one style defined. So I wanted to just drive home the point about nesting here. And remember that you can also add in classes if you want. I prefer to nest rules like this and target them that way, but you could also, if you like, define a class on things. So you could do a class equals my cool item, and then you could target that in here with the dot selector. So dot my cool item instead, which will allow you to target classes, whereas this allows you to target elements. And you can also target attributes using brackets like this. So you could have my attribute, and you can target IDs using the hash. So if you had, we'll just call it my thing, because that's what I can come up with. We'll add the brackets to those. So if I was to jump in here, and I could then, instead of using a class, I could do ID equals my thing, and you can target that instead. So there's a bunch of ways you can target stuff with CSS selectors. So do whatever makes the most sense to you and what makes sense for your application. But in general, I prefer to just target the elements with nesting like this, mainly because I think it looks neat. And I don't have to write in classes manually myself. So as a last example, we're just going to add some slight styling to this Ion avatar. So to do that, we could either put it here, Ion avatar, which is going to correctly select that because it's an Ion avatar. It's inside of our homepage component here. But we could also, if we want to be more specific, we can also define more styles. We can nest it again inside of the Ion item. So the Ion item has its own styles, and then we have some more elements nested inside that we want to apply styling to. So if I was to set this to, I'll just set the opacity to 0.5, save that, and now that element has a lesser opacity than the rest of the elements. So in this case, it doesn't make a difference if we put this in here or in outside here in the page home selector. It's probably better to do it in here. It's making it more specific. That way, if you did just want to target just this avatar, let's say you had more avatars somewhere else, that way it's going to just target this one. Again, it depends on what you're actually trying to achieve, but in general, the nesting is good. It makes the rules more specific, but maybe you don't want to go too overboard as well. So the end result here isn't amazing. We haven't done some crazy CSS and made this awesome application, but I just wanted to step through some different ways to style an application with you, give you a bit of a live coding demo. I wasn't really sure what I was going to end up coding here, but I wanted to kind of show you the way I would usually go about styling an application and messing around, playing with things, trying a few different approaches. In general, I mostly rely on using these SCSS files to define custom styles. I will overwrite these colors here and use those throughout the application. Sometimes I'll use a couple of shared variables, but usually I find it's more difficult to hunt down which variables affect what. So in a lot of cases, I do end up just using the CSS, and I think it's a perfectly fine way to do it. And another important thing is just to remember to make use of this debugger here. It's a really good way to figure out what's going on. If you're creating some style, it's not being applied, you can easily just jump in here, see what's going on, click on different elements, see what styles are being applied, toggle them on and off, and see if you can make what you want to happen. You can even come in here directly and add styles and see if it does what you want. And you also notice that Ionic adds all these additional elements in here. It's not just what is defined in your template, because these components are made up of a template that's going to display in here. So in here we have a div with a class of item inner, so that might have some styles applied to it that you want to target specifically, and so you could come into your CSS here and then target that if for whatever reason that thing was doing something you didn't want it to. So it's very important to be comfortable with this debugger and be able to see what's being applied. It's going to make your job a lot easier if you are comfortable with using this. So have a play around with it whenever you're working on your applications if you're not already comfortable with that. Okay, so I'm going to end the video there before I ramble on for too long. But I hope this was useful to you, and I hope you learned a little bit about CSS and how to apply that to Ionic 2 in the process. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.